on Vladimir Putin.
Oh, yeah.
This guy, he's been like a force of nature on the world stage for what feels like forever, right?
He's been around a while, that's for sure.
And you, our amazing listeners, you want to know like everything about him. You want to know how he got to where he is, what he believes in.
What makes him tick?
Exactly. What makes him tick? What's he done during his time in power? And really, like, what's his impact been on Russia and the world, honestly?
Did the big one.
Yeah, no kidding. And, to help us out, you guys sent in like a mountain of research, like articles, analysis, even like sections from his Wikipedia page. So thank you for helping us out with that.
Yeah, we're definitely not lacking for information.
Definitely not. Okay. Full disclosure, when I saw all those sources, I kind of, freaked out a little
A
bit.
little intimidated.
Yeah, just a tad. I mean, this is Putin we're talking about. But luckily...
That's why I'm here.
Exactly. I am so ready to have my mind blown by what we uncover about this really enigmatic leader. And I think a great place to start would be with the fact that, Putin wasn't always the big guy calling the shots.
Right.
He didn't just like magically appear in the Kremlin one day.
No, not at all. His journey actually started far, far away from the world of politics. We're talking the shadowy world of the KGB.
Wait, hold up. So you're telling me before he was like shaping global events and giving speeches at the UN, this guy was like a real life spy?
That's right. For 16 years, he was a foreign intelligence officer. He even rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel.
I got to be honest with you. This is way cooler than I thought this was going to be.
We know what they say, truth is stranger than fiction.
It's true. So, okay, 16 years in the KGB.
Yeah.
That's got to have had some kind of impact on him, right? Like you don't just do that and come away unchanged.
No, absolutely not. Imagine 16 years of intense training discipline, secrecy, strategic thinking, always looking for leverage. These are all hallmarks of the KGB, and these qualities are deeply ingrained in Putin's leadership style, even today. You can see those threads running through everything he does.
So all those years in the shadows, it wasn't just about like secret missions and code names. It sounds like it fundamentally shaped how he sees the world and how he operates within it.
You got it. He even had an alias, Comrade Platov.
No way. Okay, that's straight out of a spy novel.
Right.
So where was he operating? Like what was he doing during all this time?
His posting in Dresden, East Germany during the 80s, that was a crucial period for him. Picture Putin working undercover, navigating the tensions of a divided Europe, all while the Cold War is raging around him. Those experiences, they had a profound impact on his views about power, about the West, about the global order itself.
Okay, I'm trying to picture him like trench coat, secret meetings.
The whole 9 yards.
Yeah, the whole 9 yards, like a scene right out of a movie. But okay, how does someone go from that world, from being a spy to leading a nation? Like that's a pretty massive leap.
It is a big jump, and it all starts in 1991 as the Soviet Union was falling apart. Putin resigned from the KGB. This was a time of massive upheaval for Russia, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of chaos.
Yeah, no kidding. Like their whole world was changing.
Exactly. And it seems Putin saw this as a chance to serve his country in a new way. So he entered politics, starting in the St. Petersburg administration. He was basically getting his feet wet, learning the ropes of local governance.
So he trades in his spy gadgets for like a suit and tie and starts working his way up the political ladder.
Right.
Is it a long, slow climb?
Not quite. His rise was more like a rocket taking off.
Really?
Oh, yeah. In 1996, he landed a gig in Moscow, right in President Yeltsin's administration.
Okay, so now we're getting into the big leagues.
Right into the heart of Russian politics. And Putin, he quickly gained Yeltsin's trust, became the head of the FSB, the successor to the KGB, then secretary of the Security Council. All this in just a couple of years.
Okay, that's got to be some kind of record, right?
Yeah.
How do you explain that kind of meteoric rise?
I mean, some of it was probably luck, being in the right place at the right time, but you don't get that far on luck alone. Putin is undeniably a shrewd operator. He proved himself to be competent, loyal, and then a defining moment comes the 1999 apartment bombings and the Second Chechen War.
Right, and that was like a time of chaos and fear for Russia. It seems like the perfect storm for someone like Putin with his background to step in.
Exactly. Amidst all the uncertainty, Putin projected strength. He was decisive. He promised to crush the Chechen rebels, restore order, and that resonated with a population who was just desperate for stability.
So he tapped into that desire for law and order, positioned himself as the leader who could, bring Russia back from the brink. It's amazing how a crisis can reshape a nation's, entire trajectory.
Absolutely. And his approval ratings, they skyrocketed. Then, in a move that surprised a lot of people, Yeltsin resigned at the end of 1999. He appointed Putin acting president. Just 4 months later, Putin officially won his first term as president of Russia. Talk about a whirlwind.
That's wild. Hold on, though. Wasn't there some controversy surrounding all of this? Like Yeltsin's resignation, Putin's sudden rise? I feel like I remember something about guarantees made to Yeltsin and his family.
You're right, there's a little more to the story. On Putin's very first day as acting president, he grants Yeltsin and his family immunity from prosecution.
Oh, wow.
Now remember, there had been allegations of corruption swirling around Yeltsin for years,
Right.
so this move definitely raised some eyebrows.
I bet it did. It makes you wonder about backroom deals, power consolidation. It's like a whole other layer of intrigue to this story.
Absolutely, and that's just the beginning. Trust me, Putin's story gets even more interesting as we dive into his presidencies.
Okay, now I'm really hooked.
Good, because we're just getting started.
Last time we left off with Putin stepping into the presidency, amidst all this political maneuvering and a nation that's just like craving stability.
Right.
So it feels like we're about to enter a whole new chapter here, or maybe even a whole series of chapters in this story.
You could definitely say that Putin's time in office, it spans over 2 decades, multiple terms, a constantly shifting global landscape. To really get a grasp on his impact, we need to break it down into, distinct periods, each one marked by key events, policy shifts.
Okay, so like chapters in a book.
Exactly. Think of it as a roadmap to help us navigate this, this vast and intricate terrain.
Okay, I am ready to hit the road. So let's rewind back to the beginning. What were some of those defining moments of his early years as president?
Let's go back to his first 2 terms, from 2000 to 2008. This was a time of relative economic growth for Russia,
Okay.
fueled in large part by rising oil and gas prices.
Right, Russia's got a ton of natural resources.
Huge reserves, and Putin, he leveraged those resources strategically to stabilize the economy, improve living standards, at least for certain segments of society.
So early Putin, good for the economy, at least on the surface.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing things weren't always so rosy, right? What about those Chechen rebels he had vowed to crush? Did he actually follow through on that?
The Second Chechen War, it was a brutal and bloody conflict that cast a really long shadow over those early years of Putin's presidency. There were significant human rights violations reported on both sides, but for a lot of Russians who were just exhausted by years of instability and violence, Putin's hardline approach, it reinforced his image as the leader who would do whatever it took to restore order.
Right, because it's easy to forget when you're not living through it just how much chaos and uncertainty there was in Russia in those days.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like a complex legacy, a mix of economic progress and this really controversial war. Were there any other events during these, first 2 terms that you would consider defining moments for Putin?
One event that really put his leadership to the test was the Kursk submarine disaster in 2001. You remember that?
Oh, yeah. How could I forget? It was all over the news. A Russian nuclear submarine sinks in the Barents Sea, and all 118 crew members tragically lost their lives.
A national tragedy.
It was. How did Putin handle a crisis like that?
Well, initially there was criticism of his response. Some people felt it was slow, lacking transparency.
Right.
But eventually he takes responsibility. He meets with the families of the victims. And that act of, empathy and accountability, it helped him regain some public trust.
So in those first 2 terms, we see economic growth, a war with a, complex and controversial legacy, and a major test of leadership in the face of tragedy.
It's a pretty good summary.
It's a lot to process, but the story doesn't end there, right? What happens next in this Putin presidency saga?
Okay, so constitutional term limits prevented Putin from seeking a 3rd consecutive term in 2008. So he endorses Dmitry Medvedev as his successor.
Okay.
Medvedev wins the election.
But Putin doesn't just ride off into the sunset.
No, not at all. He becomes prime minister.
Interesting.
A lot of people saw this as a way for him to kind of, maintain control behind the scenes.
Right, so Medvedev's the face, but Putin's still pulling the strings.
Exactly. They called it a tandemocracy.
A tandem presidency. That's fascinating, but also kind of confusing. I mean, did that power-sharing arrangement actually work, or was it basically just Putin in disguise?
It's definitely debatable how much sharing was really happening.
Right.
But this period, from 2008 to 2012, it's marked by 2 significant conflicts that really reveal Putin's, increasingly assertive foreign policy. We're talking about the 2008 Russo-Georgian War and the 2009 gas dispute with Ukraine. These events signaled a shift, a change in Russia's approach to the world stage.
Okay, those are definitely two events that deserve a closer look. Let's start with the war with Georgia. What was that all about?
The war was sparked by tensions over these breakaway regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. They were striving for independence from Georgia. Russia, under Putin's leadership, intervenes militarily, sides with the separatists.
Now,
And ultimately, Russia recognizes their independence.
so a clear demonstration that Putin was not afraid to use military force to advance what he saw as Russia's interests, even if it meant clashing with neighboring countries.
And then you have the gas dispute with Ukraine, in the depths of winter no less. Russia abruptly cuts off gas supplies to Ukraine during this price dispute, and of course it had a ripple effect across Europe, which relies heavily on Russian gas.
Right, because Russia's a major energy supplier.
Exactly. It was widely condemned as an attempt by Putin to pressure Ukraine and assert Russia's energy dominance. It raised serious concerns about Russia's reliability as an energy supplier.
Yeah, I can see why that would make people nervous.
It was a power play, no doubt about it.
So we're starting to see a pattern here. Putin utilizing Russia's economic and military might to achieve his goals both at home and abroad.
You're picking up on a key aspect of his leadership. And throughout all of this, his carefully cultivated public image, it remained strong. He was portrayed as a decisive leader, a master strategist.
Oh, right. And who could forget those shirtless photos of him riding horses, fishing,
Yeah.
projecting this image of masculinity and vigor.
Exactly. It was a carefully crafted image that resonated with a segment of the Russian population.
Okay, so we have this tandem presidency thing going on. Putin's pulling the strings, asserting Russia's power on the world stage. But his term as prime minister, it can't last forever, right? So what happens next? Does he just fade into the background?
Not a chance. In 2012, conveniently enough, the constitutional term limits had been extended from 4 years to 6 years.
Oh, handy.
This paves the way for Putin to return to the presidency. And he does just that. He wins the 2012 election with, a comfortable margin. But this election, it was not without controversy. There were allegations of fraud, protests.
So Putin 3.0, back in the big chair, but this time with a cloud of suspicion, questions about the legitimacy of the election. It feels like we're entering a new phase, a turning point.
Definitely. And this term, from 2012 to 2018, it could be summed up as the Putin of annexation and intervention.
Catchy title.
Two major events dominate global headlines: the annexation of Crimea and Russia's intervention in the Syrian civil war.
Okay, whoa, those are two massive geopolitical shifts. Let's break them down one by one because they have far-reaching implications. First, Crimea. Reminding how that all unfolded.
Crimea, this peninsula in the Black Sea, historically part of Ukraine, but with a largely Russian population. In 2014, after the Ukrainian Revolution that ousted the pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, Russian troops, they take control of key locations in Crimea.
And I remember those troops. They were like these mysterious soldiers without any insignia, like ghosts.
Exactly, very cloak and dagger. Then a referendum is held, widely considered illegitimate by the international community, and Crimeans vote to join Russia.
It all happened so fast. Yeah. And Putin just declares Crimea part of Russia, just like that.
Pretty much. He argues it's a historical correction, claims Crimea had always been Russian territory, says he's protecting the interests of the Russian people living there.
Bold move. And I'm guessing that didn't sit well with pretty much everyone else.
The annexation of Crimea, it was met with widespread international condemnation. The West imposes sanctions on Russia, accuses Putin of violating international law, destabilizing the region. But domestically, the move was popular. It boosted his popularity among those who saw it as Russia, taking back what was rightfully theirs, a sign of strength against the West.
I can see how reclaiming this, historically Russian land would appeal to nationalist sentiments. But then there's Syria, a completely different part of the world, a whole other conflict. How did Russia get involved there?
In 2015, Russia enters the Syrian civil war, siding with President Bashar al-Assad, a longtime ally. The official reason: to fight terrorism, specifically ISIS. But many saw it as a strategic move by Putin to, prop up a dictator, expand Russia's influence in the Middle East.
So we see Putin, the power player, making bold moves not only in Russia's backyard, but on a global scale. His third term, it really solidified his image as a strongman who wasn't afraid to, defy the West and assert Russia's interests.
Right.
Even if it meant using military force.
Right.
But there was another big event that happened during this time, something with like huge repercussions for the U.S.
You're talking about the 2016 U.S. presidential election.
Yeah.
U.S. intelligence agencies concluded that Russia interfered in that election,
Right.
aiming to sow discord, maybe even influence the outcome in favor of Donald Trump. This was a very controversial finding, and it continues to have political fallout.
And Putin was personally implicated in this interference, wasn't he?
That's the assessment of U.S. intelligence, yes. But Putin has denied any involvement. It remains a really complex and contentious issue.
Okay, so from economic growth to war, from annexations to alleged election interference, Putin's third term was quite a ride.
To say the least.
But hold on, we're not done yet, are we? What about his fourth term?
There's more to come. Putin's fourth term, beginning in 2018, it continued many of the trends we've been talking about. He wins the 2018 election, but again, there are allegations of fraud, voter suppression.
It seems like those accusations have become a recurring theme in Putin's political career.
Yeah.
But wasn't there something big that happened during this term? Something about, like, a significant change to the Constitution?
You're right. In 2020, Putin orchestrates these constitutional amendments that would potentially allow him to remain in power until 2036.
Wait, what? Seriously? 2036?
You heard that right. It was a move that essentially paved the way for him to rule Russia for decades to come.
Wow, that's a major power grab even for Putin. Did anyone try to stop him?
There were protests, but they were met with a harsh crackdown. Opposition figures like Alexei Navalny arrested and imprisoned. Putin's control over the media and the political system tightened.
Sounds like it became even more dangerous to speak out against Putin.
It did. And then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic hits. It had a major impact on Russia, just like everywhere else.
Right, a global pandemic.
Yeah.
It's hard to even imagine how that must have played out in Russia under Putin.
It was a challenging time for sure, and it really reshaped the global landscape in ways that are still unfolding.
So we left off with Putin, really tightening his grip on power in Russia and a world that's grappling with this pandemic. I mean, it felt like something big was about to happen.
Yeah.
And 2022, well, it definitely didn't disappoint.
You said it 2022, that was a turning point. I mean, that's when Putin launches a full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Right.
An action that really shocked the world. I mean, it triggered the largest war in Europe since World War II. Talk about a pivotal event.
It's hard to even overstate the impact of this invasion. The world watched in disbelief as Russian tanks rolled across the border and Ukrainian cities are just bombarded. It felt like we were seeing history unfold in real time.
It was a stark reminder of how fragile peace really is.
For sure.
And the devastating consequences of military aggression. This invasion, which Putin calls a special military operation, it's been met with widespread condemnation from the international community. The sanctions imposed on Russia, they're unprecedented, and Western countries have really rallied to provide military aid to Ukraine.
It's been a pretty united response.
It has.
Against what a lot of people see is a pretty clear violation of international law.
Definitely.
A threat to the global order.
It makes you wonder if maybe Putin miscalculated things a bit, both in terms of like how the military operation itself has played out, but also the global response it provoked.
Yeah, like, did he really think it was going to be this quick and easy victory that he was promising?
It's hard to say for sure. There's a lot of debate about what Putin's ultimate objectives in Ukraine really are and whether he genuinely believed that the invasion would be as swift and decisive as he initially portrayed it. But the reality on the ground has been very different. It's a protracted and bloody conflict with heavy casualties on both sides and devastating consequences for the Ukrainian people, a humanitarian crisis that's still unfolding.
It's a truly tragic situation with no easy solutions in sight. So how has this war, how has it impacted Putin's image, both domestically and internationally?
Well, on the world stage, he's become increasingly isolated. He's been labeled a pariah, accused of war crimes, condemned by many world leaders. But within Russia, the picture is a little more complicated. State-controlled media has pushed this narrative of a defensive war against Western aggression. And there's evidence that, at least initially, a lot of Russians rallied around Putin.
But there have also been signs of dissent, too, right? Like, haven't people in Russia protested against the war, even though it's, pretty risky?
Absolutely. There have been some really courageous individuals and groups within Russia who have spoken out against this war, risking arrest, fines, even imprisonment. They represent this vital voice of opposition, challenging the official narrative, highlighting the human cost of this conflict.
So we've got this war with global ramifications, international isolation for Putin, a tightening grip on power within Russia. It's a really complex and, ever-evolving situation. Where does all of this leave Putin? What does the future hold for him and for Russia?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
It's a situation with so many variables. I mean, predictions are almost impossible.
Right.
Some experts, they believe that Putin has overreached, that this war will ultimately weaken his hold on power, and that Russia's heading for a period of real instability. But others argue that he's managed to maintain control, that the sanctions, while damaging, haven't crippled Russia, and that he's prepared to play a long game, just waiting for the international community's resolve to waver.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've journeyed through decades of history, examining some really complex events, and explored the shifting dynamics of global power. We delved into Putin's KGB past, his rapid rise to power, his early economic reforms, his increasingly authoritarian rule, his actions in Crimea and Syria, and ultimately his decision to launch this war in Ukraine.
It's been quite a deep dive.
It really has. Hopefully you, the listener, now have a better understanding of who Vladimir Putin is, how he operates, and the profound impact he's had on Russia and the world.
And while we've only just scratched the surface, we've covered a lot of ground.
We really have, and we always emphasize that there's always so much more to learn and explore. What stood out to you, listener, as the most intriguing or surprising aspect of Putin's story? What questions are still swirling around in your mind?
Here's a final thought to ponder. Will history remember Putin as the leader who restored Russia to greatness, or as an autocrat who led his country into isolation and war? I mean, that's a question that historians and analysts and everyday citizens are going to be grappling with for years to come. His legacy is far from settled, and the consequences of his actions, they'll continue to ripple through time.
And on that note, we wrap up our exploration of Vladimir Putin. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
We encourage you to keep those sources coming. There's a whole world of knowledge out there just waiting to be unpacked.